Well, politics is a fascinating, ever-moving subject. So essentially it works, we do a unit about British politics. So the first year they spent learning all about the British political system. So stuff like, how healthy is our democracy? There's some concerns over the fact that people aren't voting, but they're participating in other ways. So does that mean that we're in a bad situation? We learn about the political parties, so about their policies and how they've evolved over time. We learn also about voting behaviour, so why people vote in the way they do, and factors which used to be important perhaps 50 years ago, which around things like their class, why that's no longer such an important issue. It's just a really good subject. The main thing that I think is really good about it is that it's always sort of moving. So it's something that, when I was at school, I used to learn things and go, why am I learning this? How does it affect my life? And with politics, you can actually, as soon as we start learning about it, the girls start being able to engage in the stuff that's happening around them. And they find that that's sort of exciting, and they can sort of see the connection between what they're learning and the outside world. There are 3 papers in A-level politics. The first one is British politics. So there are 2 papers. First one, as I said, which is looking at things like democracy, looking at Parliament, how that works. Do they perform their functions well of lawmaking, representing people? People don't always think they're very well represented by politicians. And also, as I said, going into things like why people vote the way they do. Are there certain trends? Do people vote the way they do because of their age or because of their class or background or that kind of stuff? And also political parties. There's also a new element to the course, which is learning about the different ideologies. So they learn about socialism, conservatism and liberalism. And in the second paper, they learn about the British Constitution. So we have a slightly quirky system. Basically, our rules it's sort of quite vague. And some people think that's quite worrying because it means that people's sort of rights aren't necessarily set in stone, but at the same time, it means it's quite adaptable. So that's quite interesting. That we learn about the Prime Minister and the extent to which the executive branch of government dominates, what makes a Prime Minister powerful. We look at previous Prime Ministers, points of their premiership, that whether they've been particularly powerful or not. We also learn about the relationship between the 3 branches of government. So you have the executive branch, which is like making the decisions. You have Parliament, that's supposed to be the lawmaking body and making sure that the executive does their job properly. And then you're supposed to have the judiciary, which is the rule. They're sort of making sure that the judges are making sure that everybody's sort of following the rules. And the extent to which does the executive dominate the others, or which branch of government is the most powerful. And also there's also a little bit on the EU as well, which is obviously very topical. And then in year 2, they learn about American politics. So a system which on paper is very, kind of perfect really. It's all set in stone. It was written in 4 months. It survived all this time. But actually in the practicalities of it is that they have a lot of issues. And so the girls enjoy learning about different presidents. They enjoy learning about the influence of money in American politics, which is a massive thing. There are now presidential election cycles where they're spending over $1 billion, and the influence of where that money comes from, the fact that the party system is so polarized. So they have these 2 parties that just do not agree on anything, and there's no willingness to work together, and the fact that it actually ends up kind of a log jam. And very little gets done. So it's a really interesting contrast with British politics, which looks on the surface like there's got a few things about it that are a bit quirky and maybe a bit worrying, but actually you could probably argue that it's in actuality it works probably, it functions slightly better than in America, but it's nonetheless a good and interesting contrast. The girls, I don't know whether it's just this particular area, but actually I think the girls are inherently very political. Not all of them necessarily know that, but once you start they get a baseline of knowledge so that they can actually realize that they can actually have their own opinions on things. They get really engaged. There's a lot of stuff that happens outside of lessons. So we have, over the last year or so, we held a school-wide debate on Brexit, where the girls got involved and explained the different nuances of what it meant to leave the European Union. We held a mock election last year, which was really good across the school. So the girls campaigned for the various different parties. There was a debate. They led assemblies, and they also gave some insight in some podcasts. So I think they realised that I think a lot of them say that they appreciate that a lot of political opinions come from parents or from what people tell you. And once they start to learn about it, they realise that they don't necessarily agree with their grandmother or their dad, and actually they can start being able to, they're rather than sitting there kind of just nodding their head at a dinner table, they can actually start to realise that they can kind of, they can argue their point of view in a way that is kind of informed, and it allows them to grow in confidence. So not only, is it a successful subject in terms of their A-level results, but actually they turn out as confident, outward-looking people. As well as the stuff that goes on inside school, we also run a trip to Houses of Parliament. So they get toured around, and often they get to catch their local MP where they can ask them questions. They also do a workshop. There is also a trip to the Supreme Court. So when we're learning about the relationship between branches, they go into the Supreme Court and they discuss cases. So how would they judge on certain really quite controversial and topical issues. There is also a trip to the British Library where they have congressmen come and talk about the state of American politics, and the girls really enjoy that, and it's really interesting for them to listen to a slightly different perspective, perhaps from the kind of mainstream view that we have here in this bubble of Southwest London. So there's a lot of opportunities, and the girls do pick up on that, reflecting back on the course, that they do really enjoy it. I love politics because I didn't always find school that interesting, and I had a brilliant politics teacher, and I suddenly realised that there was a whole world out there that I didn't know about, and that actually the stuff I was learning was relevant, and I could turn on the TV or I could open a newspaper and realise that it was really important, and that you have a say, and that these ideas are controversial and they massively impact people's lives. So I loved it, and I try to, along with people in my department, we try and pass on that enthusiasm to the next generation, I guess.